My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. As a child in the 1950s, I had a subtle awareness that there was more to existence than our five senses perceived. In the 1960s, with the advent of the psychedelic era, older friends who were experimenting with LSD, magic mushrooms, and other mind-altering substances described the same experiences that I had without the use of these. What was I tapping into? Were there ancient energy and other levels of consciousness available? In later years, I came to learn that ancient cultures had these experiences with and without mind-altering substances, and that these were fundamental to understanding what science has termed quantum reality. I also learned that there was a connection between the pineal gland, what the ancients called the third eye, and altered states of consciousness. Is there a way that humanity may once again access this ancient understanding, and in doing so restore empathy, compassion, and oneness? My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Dr. Johan Calleman, has made a study of the ancient wisdom of the Maya and how that civilization employed altered states of consciousness to understand the multidimensional nature of reality. Dr. Calleman is a scientist with a PhD in biology from the University of Stockholm. He's a former senior researcher of environmental health at the University of Washington in Seattle and an expert on carcinogens for the World Health Organization. He's the author of 7 books, including his last, The 9 Waves of Creation. His website is Calleman.com, spelled Calleman.com, and he joins me this week to discuss his groundbreaking new book, Quantum Science of Psychedelics, the Pineal Gland, Multidimensional Reality, and Mayan Cosmology. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited Dr. Johan Calleman. Hello, Carl.
Hello, Victor. Thank you for a wonderful introduction. I think it really captures a lot of what the book is all about.
Carl, Destination Unlimited is predicated on the crossroads of science and spirituality. This concept speaks to your background and experience. Please share with our listeners your initial path in science and later journey into the mystical.
I started out with a fairly, you might say, regular scientific career in the hard sciences, a chemist basically, but also a biologist, and was doing work in the crossroads between these different scientific disciplines. And I was pretty happy doing that, I must say. I still love science very much, and I teach. You might say I have now come back to teaching chemistry here at a little college in New Mexico. But what happened to me was that when I was 29 years old, and I was then still a graduate student, I decided to take a trip to Mexico. Or you might say I felt actually called to go to Mexico. And in those days, that was not such an easy thing as it would be today, or the communications. Internet did not exist. And just as an example, I went there and happened to arrive at the Day of the Dead in Mexico City, unbeknownst to myself. And you can imagine a Swedish, which I take to mean a very rational, kind of secular person, coming to this very colorful culture and ending up, unbeknownst to myself, in a town where they had the skeletons hanging from the light poles because it was the Day of the Dead, and all kinds of signs of the kind of celebrations that they've had with their deceased ancestors. And so anyway, I backpacked around Mexico and Guatemala for, I think, 6 weeks or something like that. And I did familiarize myself, especially with this mighty city of Teotihuacan, which is outside of Mexico City, but also with the Maya down in Yucatan and Guatemala. And it really was a life-changing event. I felt this is definitely where my purpose in life is to be found. And I didn't simply leave my scientific hard sciences career. But these memories or this feeling of a purpose, it always stayed with me. And then I continued. I took on a position at the University of Washington in Seattle and was there for about 10 years, working with chemical carcinogens, working with environmental problems and so forth, until a number of circumstances led me to abandon that career. And then I started instead. I just felt irresistibly pulled to go into and try to contribute something to the mystery of the Maya, as it's often been called. And that's really what I've been devoting myself to ever since. And but I think, especially with this book that's coming out now, dealing with psychedelics and explaining how they could have the kind of lead to the kind of experiences they do, it turns out that my previous career is of use, because I do know something about these things with the receptors and the chemical structure of psychedelics and so forth. And so I'm happy to be able to join my my 40 years of previous life in one book through this.
Now, my understanding is that your experience with the Mayan concepts came to the fore, as you said, you were called in the early 1990s. What happened?
Well, it wasn't like actually anything, any thunder and lightning coming from the sky or something like that. I do feel sometimes I'm just called without something, and it overwhelms me, you might say. And it is like a book comes from the sky telling me, you're supposed to write me, and you're the only one that is supposed to write me. And then when that happened, I just follow it. I think, if one thing that I have come to apply in my life is to follow the guidance, which even if it doesn't seem rationally intelligent at first sight, it very often turns out to be very meaningful in the long run. And I get overwhelmed by these callings somehow.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Listening to your inner voice, your intuition. Some people call it your gut, listening to your gut and following through. So how did your experience with the Mayan culture inspire your study of the Mayan calendar?
Well, I think already the first time that I came to their lands, I read about it and their calendar system, and one thing I heard was that supposedly their calendar would come to an end. But maybe more importantly, I learned about this, what they call the sacred calendar, where every particular day is associated with a particular day sign, something that supposedly captures the energy, something, the essence, I would say, in a particular day. And that is very different, very alien to our way of looking at time, which is basically a straight timeline where, things just move on in a linear fashion. No, to speak a little bit scientific language, you might say that the shifts between these day sign energies are like quantum leaps. It's one day we have one particular energy, and then the next there is another one, and there's a leap between them. It's not a continuous line as we have in when we look at our watches, where everything is sort of just numerically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, there are quantum shifts between these different energies. And that these things, and somehow I did feel they are right, since I felt they were right in having that kind of a view of time where energies create timing for certain events, I couldn't, it was enough to convince me that this was something to worth pursuing, to go into.
My guest this week, we're going to take a little break right now. We'll come back and continue this thought. My guest is Dr. Carl Johan Calleman. He's the author of The Quantum Science of Psychedelics, The Pineal Gland, Multidimensional Reality, and Mayan Cosmology. We'll be back with more of Carl after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Roll up to the Mystical Minds Convention. Step right this way. Coming March 28th and 29th in Newark, California, just south of San Francisco, the first annual Mystical Minds Convention. Founded by Melanie Marquis, Mystical Minds is a new pagan, paranormal, and metaphysical convention created to expand our minds as well as our networks. Enjoy a weekend of fun, learning, and making connections in a comfortable and welcoming space that fosters unity by honoring the diversity of minds, bodies, and spirits. This is Victor the Voice Fuhrman, and I am honored to be a featured presenter and panelist. For more information and to register, visit mysticalmindsconvention.com and roll up for the Mystical Minds Convention. Step right this way.
Hope you enjoyed your meal. And I just want to say, he's lucky to have a brother like you.
Lucky? Caring for my brother is far from easy. But he's a part of me, like my arms and legs, so I'll be his. No time for tired. Nothing can disable this love. He needs me, but I'm the lucky one, even though I need help now and then.
If you're caring for a loved one, visit aarp.org/caregiving for care guides and community. Support for your strength. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
My mother was very familiar with her neighborhood, but one day she stopped at the stop sign and she wasn't even really sure where she was at.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Dr. Carl Johan Calleman. He's the author of Quantum Science of Psychedelics, the Pineal Gland, Multidimensional Reality, and Mayan Cosmology. So before the break, Carl, you were talking about your experience with the Mayan concepts of time. What do you see from the Mayan perception of time? You talked about how we look at things from any linear standpoint. What did the Mayans do?
Well, to them, every time period was characterized with these kind of symbols, you might say. And So, for instance, today, as we're talking, the symbol that would determine or capture the essence of today is 11 staff, or if I want to say in Mayan language, it's called Ben. So this particular time period time period is characterized by that. And tomorrow it would be 12 Jaguar in their sacred calendar. But then that's just one calendar, the sacred calendar. It's there. If you look at these long count dates, as they talked about, which are almost always on the steles that they erected, then there is a number of these different symbols. And really those different symbols, all of those different symbols reflect some kind of essence in some other time periods. And you might say, when you put all these together, you get the understanding that time for them was multi-dimensional, that each of these symbols captured the essence of, you might say, one wave of creation or one dimension. And that sort of, it has always baffled people. Why did they have so many calendars? We don't think we need so many calendars, but they did, because their purpose of the calendars were different. It was to sort of lay out the multidimensional energy of a particular day, if you like.
Now, you had mentioned that this re-emergence or recalling that you had in the early 1990s came to you, that sense that you had to pursue this. My personal experience also includes a series of synchronicities that expanded during that same time period. Based on the Mayan calendar, was something happening in the early 1990s that would have led us to pursuing our paths?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you should be exact, it was 11th of February 1992 that I have to go back and explain a little bit then that these the calendar system is basically made up from a series of different sequences. And usually the focus has been on 13 steps in these sequences. And so, and I call them waves. Because they look like sine waves. And what happened then in the early 1990s, in 1992, if you want to be exact, is that there was one of these waves that had started in 1755 in our calendar, that came to its completing segment of what they would call a katun of almost 20 years. And so that brought a shift. And to me, personally, it brought a shift to how I would think about things. It really, before that point in time, no real significant ideas about the Mayan calendar came to me that were unique. But after that shift had happened, I was somehow open to absorb this new way of thinking. And in the Mayan view of looking at things, this came out of a cosmic shift, a quantum shift, I would say, because as I said earlier, these different symbols, the captured essences that were like quantum states of the universe. So there was a very significant shift going on there, and the mentality of human beings and you might say a new kind of spirituality became very evident, especially in the United States, I would think, but in many other parts of the world. These shifts in the Mayan calendar, they herald paradigm shifts in how human beings think. And we tend to think, or the official view of psychological science and so forth tells us that what we think is something we create inside of our heads. The Mayan view is completely different. We are receiving these information from cosmic waves, and as we receive those, and which sometimes then capture new energetic energies, our ways of thinking simply changes. So that's why we tend to think very differently from people even 50 years ago, not to mention several thousand years ago. It's because the cosmic waves that we are receiving have changed over this time.
And you talked about this in your last book from a couple of years back, The 9 Waves of Creation. Tell us about that book, please.
Well, it's a book that sort of summarizes the main 9 waves of creation. And those that have visited Mayan sites, they have seen that in several of these, the most important Mayan sites, like Palenque, Chichen Itza, Mayapan, and Tikal, centrally located, they have pyramids that are like terrace pyramids built in 9 terraces. And what that means is that these pyramids were actually like metaphors for the evolution of the universe, and so when one of the kings would climb these pyramids, he would go through 9 different states of consciousness, or 9 different quantum states. And the fact that the pyramids were not built as smooth sides, but as terraces, it symbolizes the fact is that between each of these different levels is a quantum leap. Something entirely new enters the universe when you climb to a new level. A new wave is activated. And so that's the basis of my book, The 9 Waves of Creation, but it also details a lot of how these waves actually are playing out in cosmic history, in biological evolution, in historical evolution, in religious evolution, and all of these different levels.
You discuss how the 5th wave through the 9th wave presented varying degrees from clarity of consciousness to shadows as in the Dark Ages, and then a reopening of clarity. Where are we right now?
Well, you might say at this time we are at the top. All the 9 levels have been activated, but they're running in parallel. And I think one thing we have to realize when we look at the Mayan symbolism in order to understand our situation is that it's not like a new wave comes and it replaces everything else. No, the new one, the new wave, the new quantum state is added to what already exists and tends to modify what already exists through the lower waves, as you might say. So since 2011, all of these different quantum states are active, and all of the waves that are associated, then you might look upon this as if the quantum states are transferred to us through these waves. And what this means is that we now in a quite complex situation where 9 waves are running in parallel. Some of those have gone into what you might say dark ages. Others have gone into light ages, and I think it's really necessary to grasp this and to understand what I'm saying, and to see all the empirical evidence that actually exists for these different waves. I think seriously that it's necessary to look upon it and in paper and read a book about it. But I try here to sort of give a sense of how a multi-dimensional reality is created for us, because each of these waves brings a kind of dimensionality to our ways of thinking, of creating, of perceiving reality. And but as may be obviously true for a multi-dimensional reality, the answers are not completely easy when it comes to understand where are we now looking at 9 different dimensions of reality.
We're going to continue that thought in the next segment. My guest is Dr. Carl Johan Calleman. He's the author of The Quantum Science of Psychedelics. Carl, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and your work.
Well, my book is available through Barnes & Nobles, through Amazon.com, or my publisher, Inner Traditions. And I have a website, calleman.com, CALLEMAN.com, and there are a couple of different Facebook pages where I present this, and one is really just about this new book, The Quantum Science of Psychedelics, that bring in a new perspective on how psychedelics work.
And we'll be back with more of The Quantum Science of Psychedelics and Dr. Carl Johan Calleman after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
You're listening to OTR FM, part of the IOM Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Hello, I'm Lisa Berry. Join me every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for Light on Living. A chance to see new, hear different, and feel more as I shine the spotlight on all the ways to lighten the load of life's challenges. Light on Living is your link to that new way you're looking for, that new understanding that will enhance your life, and that positive connection that will support your growth. So join me, and you'll gain insight and start to see things in a new way that motivates you.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Dr. Johan Calleman. He's the author of Quantum Science of Psychedelics, The Pineal Gland, Multidimensional Reality, and Mayan Cosmology. So we were talking about that shift that happened in the early 1990s. And in your book, you talk about the universal or cosmic tree of life. What is that?
Well, you can look upon it, in my book, I always present like two different perspectives. One is the ancient traditions, and not exclusively the Maya. The reason the Maya are so special here is that they would describe much of their mythology in mathematical terms, what we call calendars. And because they did that, it's more of a science than you find from most other ancient civilizations. But many of the concepts that the Maya would embrace were also embraced by many other civilizations. And one of those is typically the tree of life. And, being originally from Sweden myself, I happen to know that the Vikings would have a tree of life, Yggdrasil, as they would call it, which was a world tree where underneath which the gods would always gather in council every day. And so did the Maya have a tree of life. And people have, of course, heard about the tree of life in the book of Genesis or the Jewish tradition, or you can find the tree of life in Egyptian paintings, and I would think that this is the most universal of all ancient traditions. You find it almost everywhere. I encountered it myself from the Maya in the West to the Maori in the East, in New Zealand.
And in this concept of the tree of life, in many of those concepts, a serpent comes into play. What is this a serpent about?
Well, the tree of life, as I say, would say, is like the originator of the quantum states. It's a geometry, and we develop resonance with. It's a geometry in the center of the universe. There is a tree of life that is cosmic in nature. Then, entangled with that cosmic tree of life are trees of life of several different levels, like the galactic tree of life, which you may associate with the central axis of the galaxy, or the solar system tree of life, or what many ancient people would look upon, the polar axis of our own planet would be seen as a tree of life. And so it's something that exists on many different levels. But there is also then a cosmic tree of life that embraces the entire universe. And now, the part of the reason, that's a quantum state, you might say. But that quantum state is trickled down or communicated to the lower levels through wave movements. And these wave movements then is what ancient peoples would talk about as serpents. And serpents are almost just as widespread in ancient mythologies as the tree of life. And you certainly know it from the biblical story where the serpent comes out of the tree of life. And you have serpents as creator gods in many different cultures. The rainbow serpent is what the Aborigines in Australia would recognize as the primary creation god. The Maya and the peoples of Mexico in ancient times, they would revere something called the plumed serpent or the feathered serpent. And we know it mostly through its Aztec name of Quetzalcoatl. And I would say that what they sensed here, is really that there was some underlying wave movements that were creating our reality, and then they used the serpent as a metaphor for this wave movement.
And in many representations, we see the serpent, two serpents intertwined, and this is actually something that resembles our genetic makeup.
Yes, that's one of the things you may look upon, but it also resembles. There are a number of mythologies about twin serpents, where you might say one is the light and one is the dark, or one is the male and one is the female. And I think the point that these serpents really conveys to us is that so much more of our thinking, of our creating our civilizations, of our perception of reality is actually not coming from inside our own heads. The frameworks that we use to understand reality is actually coming from these wave movements that ancient peoples would symbolize with serpents. And we now at a different place in human evolution. Our minds are different from those of the ancients. But I'm convinced that if you go back a few thousand years ago, when people really developed these mythologies with serpents in critical places, and where they saw the connection between these serpent waves with the tree of life, then they could actually experience the ups and downs of history. And and so that's why they developed mythologies of serpents. It really is remarkable, and I write about this in my book, that when I first came as a young graduate student to Chichen Itza in Yucatan, I couldn't really understand why they built the whole city around a serpent. What was that about? It didn't feel, even if I wasn't a religious person myself, it didn't fit my ideas of religion at all. But it does, through a series of experiences myself, I came to realize that these were the waves, and that they were so aware of, shaped their civilization. And that's why they would devote whole temple complexes to this particular deity. It's not just Chichen Itza. You might say that there's a big pyramid in Teotihuacan, and the world's largest pyramid by volume is believed to have been one in Cholula in Mexico. And that was dedicated similarly to the plumed serpent. So it must be something much more important than just a snake, so to speak. And if you enter the cosmic perspective, and that's what I do throughout these books, then it will start to make sense.
Now, what started your interest in the use of psychedelics and mind-altering substances by the ancient and also modern shamans?
Well, that is a latecomer for me, you might say, because I wasn't part of that whole 60s movement, or what you want to call it. Pretty chaotic, I would say, look upon it from my own perspective.
Oh, yes.
and so I wasn't attracted to it for a very long time. But then I guess it's about 10 years ago or something like that I heard it from more and more sources, heard about it, and especially this, I used to think that psychedelics was something that deteriorates your brain or destroys your brain or something like that. And I had to read first and understand that, it could be, there is another explanation, which is that it opens you up to other kinds of cosmic worlds. And so once I had grasped that and left the idea that everything in my head is created inside my head, but it actually is a sort of a world that I'm creating, have come into by resonance. Once I got that, I became interested, and it's only 4 years ago now that I went down to the Amazonas and had a series of, participated in a series of ayahuasca ceremonies down there. And that was quite mind-blowing is a good word, because that's really what it does. It sort of opens up, you open up to new worlds that are entering yourself. And also, as I believe, with significant messages, or it can have significant messages, as long as you do it in a, you might say, sacred way, or a very respectful way, and do not look upon this as something you play with. So then I could feel going into altered states that were very profound, and where I felt that I had that the messages came to me from a very high cosmic state, from a cosmic center, if you like.
We're going to have a break in a moment. Talk about that resonance, that sense of resonance.
Well, initially it was just an intellectual insight. And the whole, and I think the whole Mayan cosmology mandates that you open yourself up to cosmic perspectives. And with cosmic perspectives, I don't at all mean looking at stars or planets or these kind of things, which are really material phenomena, but really to see that there are different levels of the cosmic mind, and that we may be in resonance with those.
Fascinating. My guest, Dr. Carl Johan Calleman, is the author of Quantum Science of Psychedelics. We'll be back with more of this after these words on the OMTimes radio network. Roll up to the Mystical Minds Convention. Step right this way. Coming March 28th and 29th in Newark, California, just south of San Francisco, the first annual Mystical Minds Convention. Founded by Melanie Marquis, Mystical Minds is a new pagan, paranormal, and metaphysical convention created to expand our minds as well as our networks. Enjoy a weekend of fun, learning, and making connections in a comfortable and welcoming space that fosters unity by honoring the diversity of minds, bodies, and spirits. This is Victor the Voice Fuhrman, and I am honored to be a featured presenter and panelist. For more information and to register, visit mysticalmindsconvention.com and roll up for the Mystical Minds Convention. Step right this way.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting a Teenager. Learning the lingo.
GOAT, G-O-A-T, acronym, stands for Greatest of All Time. As in, spaghetti sandwiches for dinner? They're my fave. Dad, you're the GOAT.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same. Visit adoptuskids.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
on Destination Unlimited. My guest this week, Dr. Johan Calleman. He's the author of Quantum Science of Psychedelics, the Pineal Gland, Multidimensional Reality, and Mayan Cosmology. Let's discuss the pineal gland, that tiny pine cone-shaped structure in the midbrain. What is science's understanding of the function and purpose of the pineal?
Well, if you go to official science, the most important thing that it's known to do is to regulate our wake-sleep cycle. So when we are to fall asleep, it excretes melatonin and sends that hormone out to the body, and then you will, including the brain, and then you will tend to fall asleep. So that's really, it does connect you to the light in a sense, that obviously sleeping is connected to darkness, and that's really the scientific view of it.
And that's the circadian rhythms, right? That's
right. So it adapts you to circadian rhythms, and which means that if you go to the opposite side of the planet to a completely different longitude, then the pineal gland will adapt to that and help you adapt to the day-night cycle that exists in that particular location. So that's why we can live all around the planet. It's because of this circadian rhythms associated with the pineal gland.
Now, why did ancient cultures believe that the pineal gland had mystical properties and call it the third eye?
Yeah. So that comes into then I have to go out of modern science or official modern science. My own view then that I present here in the book is that the pineal gland is a center. It's where the mind is downloaded. And that connects to what we talked about earlier, how we actually receive information from the cosmic tree of life. And when that particular reception of quantum states, that's what really is the mind, as I see it. So there is a structure, there's a geometric structure that we call the mind, and that is being downloaded from the cosmic tree of life. And you might say that the anchoring point for that is the pineal gland, which is located in a central position in our brains. So that's you might say it's the interface between mind and brain. And here I'm clearly outside of what you would call official science. Official science today says that the mind is created by the brain. And many people think that is very obvious. But this whole book is about saying that the mind is something that we are downloading. The mind is something that comes to us from the cosmic tree of life, and it comes to us with these waves that the ancients would talk about as serpents. Mm-hmm. And it's a funny thing that what's believed to be the most common of all the kind of visual experiences people have in the ceremonies with ayahuasca is serpents. People see serpents all the time, and but it's also, what the serpents are bringing is our mind, and so. There is a reason for this, I think. This is what helps us think in alignment with other people who are also downloading their minds from the cosmic center. If each brain would be creating its own mind, I think we would be very lucky if we would understand anything of anybody else. But we are connected through this because we're downloading the same minds from the cosmos.
Long before Timothy Leary and the Psychedelic Revolution of the 1960s and 70s, mind-altering substances were tools used by ancient shamans and magicians to gain insight into alternate dimensions and consciousness. What has your research shown you about these substances and how they act as a key to altered realities?
Yeah, I think, first of all, that shamanism is really not more than 10,000 years old. And the reason is that a new mind started to be downloaded at that time. And that mind was the mind that brought civilization. And so I look upon on the shamanic traditions as very much a way of going back to the more total connection that people had before with the cosmos. And what comes with that then is the ability to travel in all kinds of worlds. And these worlds, may be then what I talk about as the multi-dimensional reality that the Maya would describe through their calendar systems. But the shamanic traditions then have existed for several thousand years, and they have been about breaking through a particular mindset that started to dominate our planet 5,000 years ago, and going back to a unity consciousness that existed previously. And in that unity consciousness, the shamans would be able to travel anywhere, get relevant information for healing, and healing sometimes individuals, sometimes healing whole societies, and so forth. And today, I would say that we've come to the point where ayahuasca ceremonies and other kind of, you might say, naturally generated psychedelics have become probably the most common, certainly in the modern world, the most common word or common expression of shamanism. Because it is all about going into a more total resonance with the cosmos, and in that particular resonance, you will also get information that is useful for healing, and that, to some extent, I have experienced myself in these kind of ceremonies.
In my spiritual studies, I attended a lecture by a shaman in which he described his practice as looking at the patterns of energy around those who came to him for healing and clearing of negative patterns. Is this what your experience has been?
Well, I'm not a shaman. I wouldn't call myself a shaman myself, but I certainly have heard shamans expressing this in such ceremonies. So I have that kind of a first-hand experience of it. I'd like to add here, which I think is very important. And in this book, I would say for the first time I'm presenting a complete explanation of how these substances work and how they allow us to go into different kind of worlds. And that explanation, I'm coming back to what you said initially, that without psychedelics you had similar kinds of experiences, and that makes perfect sense. And one of the things that my particular book does here is that it doesn't say that psychedelics is the only way to get to these altered states. I would say rather that the different or altered states generated by different paths or different methods represents a variation of a theme. There is in other words, we may think that there is something very special with the fact that a psychedelic substance will contain a chemical that creates a different world. But what I'm coming to describe in this particular book is that what these substances do is not really as pharmacological as you might think. Their effect is essentially of changing the relationship between mind and brain. And the mind, as I said, then is really something that we download. You might say that what they do is that they temporarily allow us to disengage the mind and allow us to a more total apprehension of the universe. Now, this, as I argue in my book, is also something that you can come to not identically, but as in a different form, you might say, through other techniques. And they could be meditation, it could be diksha, it could be a holotropic breath work, or many other things. We're talking about a variation of a theme. But for any of this to work, we will have to have another understanding of how mind is related to our brains. And this, I think, that's the whole reason that I've used the Mayan framework as an inroad to understanding this.
Your work is fascinating. Your book is marvelous. The Quantum Science of Psychedelics, the Pineal Gland, Multidimensional Reality, and Mayan Cosmology. Carl, please tell our listeners one more time where they can get your book and find out more about you and this work.
Thank you very much. Well, and thank you for all listeners. The book Quantum Science of Psychedelics is really available through any bookstore, but it's also online, available from Barnes & Nobles, from Inner Traditions, and Amazon.com. And my own work is, I have a website, calleman.com, CALLEMAN.com, and various Facebook pages that is in my own name, but there is one that is specifically for this quantum science of psychedelics. And thank you again.
And Carl, thank you for joining us this week on Destination Unlimited. It's my hope that our consciousness is downloaded as a consciousness of oneness, and we return to empathy, compassion, and peace. Thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.